Good afternoon. Last night we took up the subject of the nature of God and touched very lightly on the subject of the nature of prayer as understood in this message of the infinite way. It is important to a spiritual student to understand the nature of God because it enables us to relax, to break loose from the strain of trying to reach God. For God does not have to be reached. Actually, to come into the spiritual life, it is not necessary to make any effort to find God or to make contact with God. God already is, and God already is omnipresence. The strain, the striving, is not really to come into contact with God. That takes place naturally, normally, and easily after we have come into an awareness of the nature of God so that we can loose ourselves from our mental struggles and striving. It must be clear to everyone, certainly everyone on the spiritual path, that you cannot reach God through the mind. God can never be known by anyone through the mind. The mind of man is not an entrance into the kingdom of God. It is only when the mind is still that God becomes known to us individually within our own being and consciously. We can be consciously aware of God. We can be consciously aware of God's presence. We can eventually attain at least some measure of Paul's demonstration in I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life, or the Master. I can of my own self do nothing. The Father within me, he doeth the works. We can come, every one of us, to some measure of that, but it will not be accomplished by physical might or by mental power. It will not be accomplished by an exercise of the body or of the mind. God is. This is a starting point. God is closer than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. This is a second point. But as long as we believe that God in any way is a giver, that is, that God can give or that God can withhold, we are not even coming close to the realization of God. God is not a giver and God is not a withholder. God is, and God is eternally being, and what God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is the same throughout all everlasting time. God never changes. Therefore, it would be an impossibility for God to do one thing today and another tomorrow. God is life, but God is life eternal. Therefore, God is never giving life, and God is never withholding life, and God is never taking life. We have to change our concepts of God in order to be able to relax in God and thereby become receptive and responsive to the God influence, the God presence, the God awareness. God cannot be influenced by man. This, of course, instantly rules out all physical might or mental powers. God cannot be influenced by man. There is nothing that man can do individually or collectively that would move God to do one single thing that God isn't already doing. There is no such thing as an individual prayer or a collective prayer that will influence God to bring peace on earth or to end wars. There is no individual prayer or collective prayer, whether on the part of a layman, a minister, a priest, a rabbi, or the most spiritual individual on the face of the globe, that will move God to heal anyone of anything. God is, and God's grace is, and God's grace is available, and His rain falls on the just and on the unjust, and it is here where I am. It is here where you are. Actually, it is neither here nor there. It is within you, awaiting recognition, acknowledgement, acceptance, and then finally realization. We wonder very often in the early part of this search, when we witness what seems to be answers to prayer, whether or not we may not be mistaken, whether we aren't actually witnessing the answer to prayer. It takes a great deal of progress on the spiritual path before illumination comes, which reveals the secrets of the human mind and how it is that the action of the human mind seems to imitate the action of Spirit or God and produce effects which would fool the very elect. We have witnessed that in the case of Moses and the magicians. We have witnessed that in the warning of the Master. When, for instance, you hear of people going to a religious shrine and being healed, and sometimes being told that it was because of prayer or that God did it, it isn't to be wondered if you really believe it, unless you investigate and investigate with a very open mind, and then find perhaps, as Dr. Carell found in Lourdes, that out of 100,000 people who went for healing, only 15 people actually received it. Of course, a thinker immediately knows that if only 15 people receive healing out of 100,000, it really couldn't have been God. God could never select any 15 people out of 100,000, probably all equally good people and sincere. There must be some other reason for it. Dr. Carell found the reason, because he investigated those 15 healings and found they had one thing in common. All 15 of those people did not go to Lourdes to pray for anybody, or rather to pray for themselves, but prayed for others whom they thought needed it more than they did. In other words, it wasn't an activity of God healing them. It was a release from self within themselves, and thereby proved one of the great factors in prayer, that the more we pray for others, the more benefit we have ourselves. Or, as the Master phrased it, it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends. Pray for your enemies. It is in acts of unselfedness that an individual finds their own freedom, not because God has taken cognizance of it and decided to reward them, but because they themselves have released themselves from the only evil there is, which is personal sense. That false sense of I which concerns itself with I, me, and mine. It is this personal sense that prevents greater benefits from prayer and from the great brotherhood that it is hoped will be established on earth. Anything at all that is accomplished from the standpoint of the human is finite, is personal, and can never be of eternal or lasting benefit. And in this I include all of the efforts that are being made in the world toward world brotherhood. Not that I would discourage them or stop them, because on the human level they are certainly far better than the evils that have prevailed. But I would certainly call attention to the fact that they never can accomplish the purpose for which they are organized, because a brotherhood can only exist as long as there is a mutuality of interests. In other words, you and I can only be friends on a human plane as long as we are going in the same direction and receiving benefits from our communion from each other. The moment our interests would be opposed to each other, we would break off our brotherhood, and tomorrow we would be in some other camp. This has been proven throughout all ages. Even those things that we call government promises, whether they are papers and agreements that are signed between one nation and another, or whether they are the agreements that our own government makes with its own people. They're scraps of paper that are only good as long as it serves somebody's interest to perpetuate them. In order to attain this goal that we are all seeking, world peace, brotherhood, harmony, we will have to attain it by spiritual means, not by human means. We will have to attain it by our conscious union with God. And this is the point that I would like to explain to you in this moment. When I, as an individual, have made my conscious union with God, my conscious contact with God, my good appears in my experience because of the grace of God, not because of the goodwill of man, not because of favoritism, not because of dollars. My good appears in my experience in all forms: health, supply, companionship, harmonious human relationships. All of this comes into my experience by the grace of God. The moment this happens to me, I can have a brotherhood with you that is indestructible, because I need nothing of you or from you. And my relationship with you is not one of getting from you or seeking from you, but if anything at all, sharing that which by the grace of God has come to me, whether it is in the form of spiritual truth or actual dollars and cents. Therefore, no personal sense enters our relationship. When you as an individual, or you as a group in this room, attain that same realization of your oneness with God, you are instantly set free from dependence on anyone in this room or out of this room, for you have made contact with the source of all good, which is God's grace, which even now in this very instant is closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, awaiting only your recognition and then your realization. Now, if each one in this room has attained that realization of their relationship to God, if they have so realized the nature of God, so that they know that they don't have to turn to God for anything, for God is pouring it through faster than you can accept it, then you too are set free. You no longer have to look to anyone for anything, even though in your entire life's experience you will be receiving more than you ever have before, and you'll be giving more than you ever have before, but never with the idea that it is necessary, not with the idea that you are dependent upon anyone or their goodwill or their friendship or their love, since you have received and are receiving that which is the greatest, God's grace. Now then, we can enter a relationship of brotherhood that would be absolutely indestructible. It would be eternal. Why? There could be no clash of interests because we have no interests. Think of that. My attention was brought to this the other day, that the trade balance this year was against the United States, and so the United States is making appeals to foreign countries to loosen up their trade activities so as to lessen this loss of trade that we are having and making these things equal. But on the other hand, when the trade balances are against other nations, they are in trouble. So what are we to do? Get our good at their expense? That will not result in lasting peace. That will not result in lasting brotherhood. If we have to have goodwill because we have the correct balance of trade and someone else hasn't, eventually there must come the fly in the ointment. However, when we as individuals and when we collectively realize our relationship to God, when we come into the awareness of God as the source of our prosperity, not trade balances, but God, we find that in our individual experience or in our individual business experience, that the most practical thing in the world is that God contact. It is an utter impossibility to have a bad business or failing business, or bad trade balance or wrong trade balance, in the light of one's conscious union with God. One does not have to live the life of an ascetic. One does not have to retire from the business or professional or art world in order to lead the God life. As a matter of fact, once the world understands this, there will be no longer need for a separate society of religious teachers. Everyone will be a religious teacher, and everyone will be a religious minister. Everyone will be a religious healer. And this God-given activity of oneness, this relationship between ourselves and our source, will prosper our individual business and our collective business and our nation's business. The first answer to this is always that it is impractical. Of course, that can't be said to us, because not only have we demonstrated the practicality of this in the healing of mind and body, not only have we demonstrated the practicality of this in the demonstration of what we call supply, but this now has been demonstrated. These principles have been demonstrated in active work with management and labor, with active work in industry, with active work in the arts, and in other directions that at this moment we shall not mention. But be assured of this: there is no practicality in all of this world except that which comes forth through spiritual realization. All else is a temporary step leading to the ultimate. Even these leagues of nations and United Nations, and don't mistake this, the United Nations is doing a great work in many parts of the world, regardless of some failures that you may be aware of through the press. I can tell you, as one who has been traveling all around the world for a good many years, that you are not hearing of its successes. You are not hearing of the fine things that it is accomplishing, unless you happen to be those who are making a special study of it. But just reading the newspapers and magazines of the day, you are not aware of the great things that are being accomplished by the United Nations. These are stepping stones But there is no ultimate solution in those things. The ultimate solution lies in the practical living of the spiritual life. That is, making conscious contact with the source, fulfilling the Master's 15th chapter of John. If you abide in the Word, if you let the Word abide in you, you will bear fruit richly. If you do not abide in the Word, and if you do not let the Word abide in you, you will be as a branch of a tree that is cut off and withereth. The practical way of life is living in conscious union with our source. Now, I told you the other evening that in presenting to you the message of the infinite way, I am presenting my personal experience. I have never been a student of the religions or philosophies of the world, and so I can only present to you my individual experience. And that experience has revealed to me this: there is a force operating in the world that separates us from our good. It is not opposed to God. It is not in opposition to God, but it acts as a barrier between us and the free flow of God's grace to our experience. I presume that an example on a material plane might be that the sun may be shining very brightly in the sky, and we not see it, because between us and the sun there has come a layer of clouds obscuring the sun, and possibly even its light and its warmth, at least in a measure. The clouds cannot be said to be an enemy of the sun or have any feelings in the matter whatsoever, nor have they any knowledge that they are acting as a barrier. So it is that there is something that operates in human consciousness as a barrier to the free flow of God's grace. This might be called evil, carnal mind, mortal mind. But actually, there is no such thing as evil, and there is no such thing as a carnal mind, and there is no such thing as a mortal mind. These things have no existence. These are merely words describing something unknown to the human mind. In other words, describing something that isn't describable, naming something that isn't describable. No one has ever been able to tell us what the carnal mind is. No one has ever been able to tell us what mortal mind is, because there is no such thing as a carnal mind or mortal mind, for there is but one mind. There is but one mind. There is but one intelligence. And when we speak of carnal mind, or when we speak of mortal mind or the devil, we are merely giving a name to something that is acting as a barrier to our demonstration of spiritual harmony, spiritual perfection. In my experience, this came perhaps as the origin of evil. Once it is known and understood how evil originated, how the possibility and potentiality of evil came into being and still exists, it becomes possible to remove these evils from our experience. That is why I have said repeatedly and written that it isn't God that has the power to heal us or reform us or enrich us, for God is already doing this. We have to remove the barrier which is separating us from the flow of God's good and God's grace. You honor God by acknowledging that God is the source of all good, that God is the activity, the life, and the law of all good, and that it is God's will that we enjoy all good. The Master stated it, it is God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And unless or until you come into an agreement within yourself that acknowledges God as the source, the activity, the law, the life of all being, and then take the next step, it is God's good pleasure that you have it. It is God's will that you have it. It is for this reason, the Master says, that he came to earth, to do the will of the Father. And then he described that will. Heal the sick so that they'll be healthy. Feed them so that they'll have abundance. Raise the dead so that there'll be no more death. End disease, end death, end old age, end accidents, storms. You see, none of these things are the will of God. This is still under the nature of God. None of these evils of earth can be laid at God's feet or God's responsibility. God's will is that disease shall not be on earth, death shall no longer exist, lack, limitation, storms, all of these God's will removes. If you accept the mission and the message of the Master, you must logically accept that God is the source of all good and that God's will for man is good, and God's will is only made manifest in the enjoyment of that good. Then, since God is in no wise responsible for your dying, since God is not responsible for your diseases, since God is not responsible for accidents, let us then first rest in this word. Rest in the realization of God's goodness, God's abundance, God's omnipotence, God's omnipresence, God's will, finally God's love. Then ask ourselves, since this is true, what is the barrier What is the activity? What is it that some mystic in the dim dark past called devil? What is it that Paul called carnal mind? What is it that modern metaphysics calls mortal mind? That acts in my individual experience as this cloud that would obscure the light and warmth of the sun. What is it that acts as a cloud or barrier in my consciousness, separating me from the enjoyment of God's grace? You will find that for this understanding you have to go all the way back into Genesis and learn what a wonderful place the Garden of Eden is, until we begin to believe in two powers, until we begin to accept two powers in this world. And then really you have started on the first step that will remove from your experiences the sins, the false appetites, the false desires, the lacks, the limitations, until step by step, moment by moment, you find yourself on the way back to the Father's house, back into divine sonship. Now, all of the means that we use temporarily, let us say first to establish health or establish peace on earth, these are temporary means. If you or I, as individuals, could, as will sometime be the case, be 100% physically well, because materia medica has arrived at a place where disease is being outlawed, and I for one don't doubt that it will reach a place where it will have the answer to every disease known to man. But even when it does, there will merely be the transition from being a sick human to being a well human. And there are times when that can be more of an evil than a good. That is very much like the wonderful change we've seen in my own human span, from a 12-hour workday, a 10-hour workday, 9-hour workday, until we're down to next to no hours of actual work, and not many days even for that. And all of this greater freedom from hours of labor should, of course, be made manifest in a greater degree of education, culture, spiritual development, so forth and so on. At the present moment, the signs aren't in that direction. But the point is that merely gaining certain amount of hours of freedom from work is not going to be man's salvation. It could be his downfall. So it is that gaining your physical health, whether you gain it through materia medica or whether you gain it metaphysically or spiritually, the fact still remains that You merely are exchanging your ills for health. And this is not the solution of our problems, any more than the establishment of a peace between you and me in this moment is any solution to our problems of human relationship. We have to go further than this. So it is. Begin with your study at first, and then finally your own inner contemplation on the subject of the nature of God, until you do become thoroughly aware of the fact that God alone is the solution to every problem, and that solution already exists within us, and it is not being withheld from us for our past sins or even our present ones. It was not withheld, from the woman taken in adultery. It wasn't withheld from the thief on the cross. It wasn't withheld from any of those that the Master met on his journey. God's grace is never withheld from us. It is not withheld because of any of your parents' sins or grandparents' sins, of omission or commission. There is no withholding God. Come to that realization. Come to this realization that in this very moment or any other moment in which you are contemplating God, come to this realization that God's will for man is freedom. That the whole function of the Master in your consciousness is to bring that freedom, and the Master is within your consciousness. The Master is not walking by Galilee. The Master is not living 2,000 years ago. The Master is living here and now within your consciousness and mine. I am always with you. Before Abraham was, I am with you. I will be with you unto the end of the world. The Hebrews have lost, up to now, their great demonstration, only for one reason. They believe the Messiah has not come. The Christians have lost their demonstration because they believe the Master came and went. Whatever reason you give, Jew or Gentile, you are without a Master. Whether you are awaiting his coming or whether you are awaiting his second coming, you are without a Master. Unless you are willing to rise above both Judaism and Christianity. Go back to the Master himself and accept his word, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Before Abraham was, I am with you, and I will be with you unto the end of the world, and I am your bread and your wine and your water, and I am with you here and now. What obscures this presence? Our acceptance only that he has not yet come, or that we are waiting for him to come again. This operates in our consciousness as a cloud operates overhead to hide the sun. So does this operate in our consciousness to hide from us the omnipresence of Christ, the Savior, the salvation, the bread, the meat, the wine, the water, the forgiver of sins, the raiser of the dead, the feeder of the hungry. All of this is here and now where I am within you. When we understand that God has not ordained any power to hide from us the Christ. God has not ordained a law of disease. God has not ordained a law of death. God has not ordained a law of sin. Only then can you begin to understand that the sins and the diseases and the wars and the lacks and the limitations of this world are without power to perpetuate themselves, and you can be freed from them here in this moment and now. Only if you cling to those nonsensical teachings which would make you believe that God ordained death or sin, or that God ordained disease for some noble purpose of which we have no awareness. Only if you can be trapped into believing that God has an awareness of these men and women suffering the horrors of cancer, the children suffering the horrors of polio, only if you can be trapped into believing that God knows this, and for some reason God's responsible for it. Only then can you be trapped into staying on this wheel of humanhood that will perpetuate your sins and diseases and wars. When you begin to understand the nature of God, you will know beyond all doubt that there is no law of disease. Therefore, there is nothing to perpetuate it in your experience. There is no law of greed or hate or animality. There is no law of tyranny, for God has not made any such. And then take your New Testament. Don't take the word of man whose breath is in his nostril. Don't take any of the thousands of books that have been written on the subject of Jesus or Christ. Go right to your New Testament and find there the nature of man that God made in his image and likeness. Find there the nature of this universe and its laws. Learn there from the Master that the paralyzed man there can get up and walk, the blind man can open his eyes, because there are no powers to stop it. No God-ordained powers. Certainly there are these human beliefs which confine us. There are these human beliefs of two powers which confine us. Throw them out by understanding the nature of God. When you understand that, I can assure you, you will not believe in two powers. You will not believe then that the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it isn't. The carnal mind is only a belief that there are evil powers, or that the evil in men's mind is power. And it isn't. It isn't. We make them powers by fearing them. We make them greater powers by fighting them. They lose their power in our experience in proportion as we can rest. Rest with the words of the Hebrew Hezekiah. They have only the arm of flesh. Temporal power, no power. And they rested in his word, and the enemy destroyed itself. So do we find in healing disease. In healing disease, in spiritual ministry, we do not exert physical power or mental power. We use no mental powers. We use no mental argument. We use no mental affirmations or statements. We rest. We rest in this word. That's only temporal power or no power. And then we watch the disease dissolve itself. We watch the enemy destroy itself. We have no power over disease any more than the disciples had power over evil. You remember the rebuke they received from the Master? "Oh, Master, we have power over the devils through thy name." No, you haven't. No, you haven't. We have no power over disease in the spiritual ministry. We have no power over sin. We have no power over error. We have learned to rest in this Word. God is the only power. Rest in that. And then watch temporal power destroy itself. In our work, we have watched it in experiments with weather. We have watched it seriously in relationship between management and labor. We have watched error dissolve itself while we stayed by without physical might or mental powers and rested in this Word. They have only the arm of flesh. Temporal power, no power. For God has not ordained any form of evil as power. If you don't believe it, study the works of Christ Jesus and see if even Pilate was ordained by God to have power, or even if the grave had the power to hold an enlightened consciousness. Well, I didn't think we were going into anything like this today. I think we ought to typewrite this and have it for one of our class sessions and have a night out. Because this is class. This is as much class as I could give you in a class. This is one of the basic revelations which have come into my experience and which are responsible for this activity of the infinite way and for whatever measure of success it has had in healing work on the mental, physical, moral, and financial levels and human relationships. And so we'll rest there until tonight, and we're apt to rest tonight too. Thank you.